John Cousins is going to talk now from NIAB. So John is talking about how our systems adapt to grass weeds. So John, I'll let you up here now. And if you do want to ask a question, put your hand up, or Shay will take them on Zoom. Thanks, John.
Thank you. So I hope the title is about how the weeds are adapting to the system and not the other way around, but we'll see. So how do weeds adapt to your system? Well, the reality is we do tend to obsess on herbicide resistance as a key way that weed populations are adapting to herbicide use, but actually we see adaptation on a number of different levels. So on the first area, which we're more and more focused on, I guess in the UK, we see the adoption of Min-till, reduced cultivation intensity, is part of a package that comes alongside the creation of different habitats for pollinators, protecting bird habitats, bird food and so on. And the first thing that I want to talk about in terms of how the system is creating new weed problems is how we see a real increased threat from invasive weeds, a real issue around biosecurity. We're seeing all sorts of weeds which are weeds in a global sense, but have not been traditionally weeds in the UK, thriving in those habitats creating space for those weeds. And the second level, probably the most significant, and I think there's an element of that in what Vijay's been talking about, we see that different systems encourage different weed species which already exist in the country. And I think it's a very interesting conversation about blackgrass and biosecurity. For us in the UK, the experience was that the blackgrass is everywhere, all the way across the country. What happened is that the system which encouraged the blackgrass spread to the north and to the west. And so the weed didn't spread, the system spread, and then in that system, with cultivation intensity, deep non-inversion, winter sown crops back to back, we saw the blackgrass really thrive. And we're seeing that play out as we see the adoption and diversification of cropping and different cultivation systems in the UK. And to me, I think the third thing is within an individual species, we're beginning to see that not just herbicide resistance is a result of patterns of herbicide use, but we're beginning to see that within an individual species, and I'm going to focus on ryegrass, weeds can adapt to key elements of the system and become more problematic, whereas in, for example, spring cropping than they had been, or become more problematic in reduced cultivation systems than they had been. So in terms of this invasive issue, so we have these are actually two photos taken on the same farm 12 months apart. We have a real issue where people are bringing different diverse seeds onto a farm, cover crops and companion crops taking hold. We haven't yet got a really mature supply chain. So this is a couple of parasitic weeds, one in a companion crop and one in a cover crop, Orobanche and Cuscuta. And these are really significant threats to the use of those sort of legume-based fertility building elements in a rotation in the long term. Our only means of control for these parasitic weeds is not to grow a compatible crop. So it's really important that farmers are very vigilant if they see these kind of exotic weeds coming onto farms, that they're aware and they understand the significance of the issue. I think the key element, again, for us, we're creating all sorts of habitats through the use of environment seed mixes, game cover, pollinator mixes, mixes for habitats for birds and bird food to fill that winter hungry gap, as we call it. But they're exotic species sown often as mixes on farm, and they seem to be coming along with significant issues around, this is Ambrosia artemisiafolia, ragweed, not ragwort, which is a sort of hypoallergenic weed that's a real problem on the European continent, and we're beginning to see in these sort of habitats. Barnyard grass, Echinocloa, Datura stromonia, which is an issue where people are bringing livestock onto graze these covers. We've had a couple of livestock poisoning incidents as a result of these weeds coming into these mixes and not being spotted. So when Vijay talks about vigilance, that's really where we are in the UK as well. We really need to roll out a little bit more botanical skills, a little bit more vigilance around these weeds. What's very important to understand is that we have a kind of public policy thrust in the UK to adopt a more diverse portfolio of crops, to look at alternative protein crops, to look at crops from other parts of the world to see if we can adopt them in the UK. Quite often these crops are relatively late spring sown, short duration crops. So we look at chickpeas, we're looking at lupins again. We keep looking at lupins, one of these days it will work. Looking at all sorts of crops like that. Alongside those sort of crops, we have the perfect weed for that niche that we're brought into some of these habitats around farms. So the barnyard grass, again, we've got a couple of examples where this weed has made the transition into an arable crop system and become the key weed for growers who are using veg crops, late spring drill crops and arable rotations. More and more Setaria species starting off as a contamination and then coming into the arable crop. We're starting, interesting, Vijay talks about Phalaris, so we predominantly we see Phalaris canariensis, which is a different species but probably filling the same niche. And just to say that we are looking at some of these game cover mixes in particular, taking out contaminants and growing the contaminants on to start screening for resistance to see if it's been imported into the UK in these weed species. So Echinocloa cruscalii is one that we're particularly focusing on. It is incredibly common, really is common. You talk about it at a talk in the UK and then the farmer will take you to a habitat on their farm and there it will be. This is significant because we don't really understand exactly where this Echinocloa, this barnyard grass, is coming from in terms of the seed supply chain. We don't have in place enough regulation in that area. They're non-productive seeds. They're not actually covered by some of the certification laws that we have in the UK. Globally, this is one of the most significant weeds in the world, and we are bringing it onto our farms routinely. So it's really important, and that's one that we're focusing on. So I think that the second area, as I said, is very definitely what we're seeing is shifts in the nature of the weed species that we're managing. This year we have a brome survey where we're looking at all brome species, but we can already see that we have got a shift in wild oats from the spring wild oat that we heard about this morning. We have a different species of wild oat, which is a winter wild oat, which is more of a significant problem in winter cropping. 30% of the samples that we receive for resistance testing now are winter wild oat and not spring wild oat. So our system has selected for a different oat species. We are also seeing, as you are, again, almost playing out the blackgrass story again. These two species which I highlight here, the Vulpia, Ratsdale fescue and the Anthriscus burr-chervil, these are ubiquitous in semi-natural habitats in the UK. They're distributed right across the country. And what happens is as people adopt a no-till, true no-till, low disturbance drilling system, usually with very low disturbance frequency and intensity, the weed invades the system and often becomes the key weed. So when we talk about biosecurity, exactly as Michael said, there are different levels. Often we think about biosecurity as protecting the farm from seeds coming onto the farm. We do also need to think about biosecurity in terms of local invasion, crops that we plant and weeds which are abundant locally coming on to the farm. So there's too much text on that, so I'll skip over. What we're seeing in the brome survey is an example of how we continue to see shifts in weed species, is if we look at brome species in the UK through different surveys that have been carried out over time. Before 2000, almost all of the brome in the UK in surveys reported in crops collected as seed samples is anisantha, so barren brome, almost all barren brome, but also great brome. Since 2000, roughly half of the brome in surveys that comes in as seed samples is not barren brome or great brome, it's actually rye brome or meadow brome. So we've seen that really quite dramatic shift. We talk about brome, but actually the biology of these broma species is quite different. The key thing seems to be that as a result of greening, crop diversification, we see more spring crops planted. We're seeing that brome species which are capable of setting seed in the spring phase of the rotation as well as the winter phase of the rotation are really being encouraged, and it's driving their abundance. So we continue to see this process. It's a live process. It's not something which is historic. We don't just have to worry about the weeds that we've always worried about. We have to worry about the new weeds. So the final kind of level, thankfully, I can see people losing the will to live, is very much that we continue to see that within an individual species, and I'm going to talk about Italian ryegrass in a bit more depth, we're seeing that the systems that are being adopted on farm, as well as the herbicides that are being used, are selecting for different characteristics within weed populations. So the most obvious selection that we see playing out is herbicide resistance. That's nice, we can test for it easily. This is all the surveys that all the samples that we received as part of a survey in 2021. This is about 200 samples. So we have, just as VJ reports, we have ALS resistance. So roughly half of the samples are ALS resistant, roughly half are actually panoxidine was the ACCAs that we tested with. So Axial Pro have resistance to Axial Pro. In the UK, this process is continuing. So I can't say whether we'll see it play out in Ireland or not, but what we experienced in the UK is that first we saw selection for resistance to contact-acting post-emergence herbicides. Very quickly, as Vijay said, they're high-risk herbicides, they're high selection pressure. We mitigated that problem by using more and more soil-acting residual herbicides, moving the load of herbicides around crop drilling, early post-emergence. And what we're seeing is that worked, that was fine, we kept going, but now we're beginning to see pre-emergence residual herbicides break down as well. That's taken a lot longer, it's a much more slower process, but in the survey, 10% of the Italian ryegrass populations that we received had absolute resistance to flufenicet. So this is a really new kind of horizon for the way that herbicide resistance is playing out on farm. This is what we mean by herbicide resistance to flufenicet. We're not messing about in the UK. When we select for resistance to a herbicide, we really go for it. We don't know half measures. This is what we see in blackgrass, for example. So this is a sensitive standard. These are just replicates. This is the field dose of flufenicet, the 240 gram dose. And we've got 3/4, half, and quarter. There are populations of blackgrass in the UK, and this is the worst one that we've tested. I'm sure other people may have seen worse, where there is a shift in sensitivity, where you can see still at below field rates, but you can begin to see some reductions in sensitivity. This is the situation in Italian ryegrass. Again, field rate, 3/4, half, quarter. This is a flufenicet-resistant population. So we have no activity at all from what was an absolute key herbicide as we lost activity from post-EMS. This is a really, really worrying development. Resistance to pre-emergence herbicides continues to evolve. The challenge is that it affects more than one family of herbicides because it's a kind of detoxification, metabolism mechanism. So these are a selection of 25 of those samples, which were the worst 25, honestly. Tested for a whole range of herbicides, and you can see for the contact-acting herbicides, this is what resistance looks like. The range of performances, yes, there's a standard in there, but they're all over the place. But we're also seeing very significant, so this is the percentage reduction in fresh weight. This is the distribution of those 25 samples. So we have samples down here where we've got 70% control from prosulfocarb, and samples we've got 100%. The key thing that I would say is that there are 2 herbicides in this panel which were not commercially available when we collected the samples. So as we continue to select weed populations for tolerance to herbicides, these weed populations are already becoming tolerant to herbicides that haven't yet been invented. That's the kind of size of the challenge that we're beginning to see. So there are patterns within it because it's a metabolizing of the herbicide type mechanism. This is when you associate the sensitivities to different herbicides, you see patterns. So flufenicet, pendimethalin, prosulfocarb are all very much affected together. Clonophen is somewhat different. Panoxidine and simethylin sit somewhere else because the nature of the metabolism is quite different. And then some talk of glyphosate, which I'm going to talk about a great deal today, but we are beginning to see differences in glyphosate sensitivity, but it is not associated with in-crop herbicide sensitivity. So it's really important. Glyphosate stewardship's for everyone. It's not just for people who've already got resistant weeds. You seem to be able to select for it independently. So in terms of other characteristics, so we obsess about herbicides. We love herbicides. They've sort of kept weed science going for years on end. What we saw when we collected Italian ryegrass populations as part of the survey is an enormous diversity in the type of samples that we were getting. Horned and hornless versions, quite different phenotypes in terms of what the heads look like. We've moved on and started to look at different characteristics, different traits, which seem to be variable within Italian ryegrass and provide adaptation to different systems. So this is a number of samples, including one of these is actually a commercial cultivar, the others are problematic arable weeds from different systems. This is vernalisation requirement. So this is winter annuals have a requirement for chilling before you start to get flowering. We can see in Italian ryegrass there are some populations with a very low requirement for chilling. These are suited to spring cropping because late spring drill, there's no chilling, but you still get lots of seed return. Some Italian ryegrass populations have a very high requirement for chilling. So these are adapted to autumn, early autumn sowings of crops because you maximise your seed return in early autumn drilling. And we're beginning to see this vernalisation characteristic providing the opportunity to adapt to different rotational systems, playing out in ryegrass, blackgrass, but also some of the bromes that we're beginning to test. So it seems to be a really important characteristic. We're also seeing big differences in fresh seed dormancy, fresh seed germination, and the response to putting fresh seeds in the dark. So the response in the field to cultivation post-harvest. Some populations have very little dormancy, some populations have much higher dormancy and respond to fresh seeds being put in dark conditions. So this is again another trait which allows for adaptation to different cultivation rotational systems. Other work, so this is work that's been done in Australia, has demonstrated that there is the capacity for, in this case, wild radish, to adapt to a harvest weed seed capture approach. So in Australia, as a result of widespread resistance, they've moved to an adoption of a system where you catch weed seeds at the end of the growing season, either in the combine or pre-harvest. They're already showing that you could select for types of weed which can overcome that by either flowering much earlier and therefore avoiding the seed capture at harvest, or being much shorter and therefore avoiding some of the other approaches. So this is, as I say, this is very much a live process. As we adopt different approaches to manage these weeds, we continue to see selection process. I'll give a quick advert to a PhD student that we have working right now, Jasper Kanomanianga, Jasper, who's really focusing very much on these traits in blackgrass and ryegrass. This is a really neat piece of work that he did. He's just finished. So these are blackgrass populations from a spring cropping background where growers have adopted 3 years plus of spring cropping. These are blackgrass populations from a continuous winter cropping regime. There are significant differences in these populations' characteristics, in this case with respect to fresh seed germination and dormancy, and the response to dark conditions, but also seeing the same adaptation with respect to vernalisation requirement. So the weeds are adapting in more, you would expect very diverse genetic background. This is what gives us the ability to select for herbicide resistance. But we mustn't forget that there are other characteristics that can also be selected for. So to summarise, we are creating these new habitats, and this is bringing a significant risk for invasive weeds. And I think I talk about vigilance as well. In this case, we're talking about biosecurity on a national level. We must look at the seed supply chain again and look at some of the regulations. We are seeing shifts in the nature of the weed species that we're trying to manage. You see these quite dramatic difference in brome species that are problematic. but also we beginning to see that we are selecting for different weed ecotypes which are fit in different rotations. The solution is the same as the problem. It's about diversity. It's about where we look to adopt alternative methods like harvest weed seed capture, also using other management. It's about using herbicides alongside non-chemical control. And that was what I was going to say.
Thanks very much, John. Yeah. So next we're going to have a video. The video is about 12 or 13 minutes long. It's really good. It's Owen Lyons Farm in County Kilkenny. So we'll play that now, and Dermot and Owen can make your way up to the stage with John, and we'll have questions after. So send your questions in to Shay on Zoom, or we'll take them from the audience after the video.
Hello, my name is Michael Hennessy. In this series of videos, Shay Phelan, Kieran Collins and I will visit farmers who are working with the Enable Conservation Tillage project over the last 5 years. We will visit these farms throughout the year to see how they're getting on using their establishment system, but also to see how they're controlling grass weeds in these systems, of which some of the weeds are problematic on many of the farms. So we're heading down here in Kilkenny down to Brian and Owen Lyons farm. We're in the middle of a conversion from a plough-based system to a direct drill-based system.
I think generally it's going very well. They're into the 5th season now this year in the direct drill system. It's had its challenges, there's no doubt, since they started. We'll hopefully get into a few crops today and see how they're progressing.
So Owen, you changed your system over the last number of years from a plough-based system into a more direct drill-based system. What prompted you to make that change?
So what prompted us here, Michael, was we've been plough-based system here since the early 80s. In that system, the land was just becoming wore out and that yields were dropping off, and it was extremely hard and difficult to try and maintain soil health. Coming out from that viewpoint, we looked at changing into a different system, with soil health being #1 priority in order to try and improve it on the farm. And that's where we landed at a direct drill system, and we started the direct drill system here in 2018.
Well, I suppose when Owen came with this, it was a major change to think that you weren't going to plough. How is this going to work? But he was very, very convincing in why it should be done and for the fertility of the soil and soil structure and all that. So we said, yeah, we'll give it a go.
We were coming from having machinery that was only usable on a plough-based system. If we had gone through the min-till system, we would have had to go buy maybe different equipment for that and then transitioned into a direct drill system. So we made a decision to go straight to the direct drill system and just have one machine then that could put our crops in the ground basically. It was a big challenge. We decided to only start our direct drilling across the farm coming in after break crops. That allowed us to improve our soil after the break crop and make sure that I suppose the transition was going to be that bit easier on land that had been ploughed up until now.
Have you made some small tweaks and changes over those last 3 or 4 or 5 years?
When I started that here on the farm, it was going to be a winter crop rotation with summer cover crops in between in order to try and improve soil health, because drilling winter crops direct drill was probably going to be that bit more easier than trying to get spring crops in. So what has happened in time, I have found that there has been autumns where it has been difficult and very challenging. We have seen that we have to wait till the spring in order to get them crops drilled. And also I've seen that from a grass weed point of view, maybe a winter crop all the time isn't the right solution or try and control our grass weeds. So what has happened here is that spring crops have become part of the rotation in order to try and improve our grass weed control and improve soil health as well, because we get a long cover crop in the ground over the winter period in order to boost soil health and soil organic matter. I do find that it is still quite difficult to solely direct drill a spring crop. And just to give one scenario, I suppose, of that trial and error, it was the catalyst, I suppose, when I saw that maybe you can't stick strictly to a no-till system, was in autumn 2019 in this field behind us. It was coming in after oilseed rape. It was the first year direct drilled, and it came in with winter barley. And that was an extremely wet autumn, if you remember back, and it was actually mid-October before we got to drill the winter barley here, which really, in hindsight, was too late for a no-till crop going in. and also probably it was too wet at the time. What happened was there was a very poor crop, so if I was back in that scenario now, I'd hold off, I'd keep my seed in the bag, I'd wait till the springtime, and if I had to go in and give that maybe a run of a cultivator or disc or something, just maybe to dry out that seedbed a bit, that's what we do, and that's really how it's evolved, and it will evolve even further going forward, I think.
So in terms of the machinery then that you decided to choose when you were making the change, what did you go for? Was it a disc, was it a tine type system, or why did you jump into that?
Yeah, I suppose we looked at the tine system and the disc system. The actual make of the drill, I suppose, it wasn't really forefront in our mind. It was getting our rotation and getting our cover crop right, you know, how we're going to get into the system, and then we looked at what drill we were going to go for.
Yeah, overall it's gone very well. Steroid brome in particular, in one part of the farm became a fairly major issue, and we had to make a few changes and adjust the rotation slightly.
So it's mid-June, it's a lovely sunny day, it hasn't rained for a good while. It's fantastic weather, and I'm heading down here to Ryan and Owen Lyons' farm, again in Ballyraggart, just to see how the lads are getting on.
On each farm, the ECT project selected a field with a high weed burden to monitor management practice. The ECT project staff used a grid methodology to count weeds each year before harvest. The results reflected how successful or not the weed control measures worked. On the map, squares coloured blue or green have a low weed population, and squares coloured orange or red have a high weed population. Given the level of brome in the previous crop, it was hoped the combination of a direct drill establishment system, which doesn't disturb soils, thereby encouraging brome germination, and winter wheat would be sufficient to control bromes. As Owen Lyons was converting from plough to a direct drill system, just one field with a high sterile brome population was selected for monitoring. Owen was keen to retain a winter crop rotation as he felt this was more suitable to a direct drill establishment system. Owen, delighted to be back again here in June. So Owen, when we hooked up here and looked at the field, it was winter wheat in the field in that year, and we can see from the harvest map there was an awful lot of brome in it. Very obvious in the field?
Absolutely, yeah. You could have left plenty of it, not cut that year if you wanted to avoid it.
Okay, so then you kind of switched on from there then out into the 2020 harvest, and you wanted to try and stick with a winter rotation, and you went for winter oats.
Worst decision we could have done.
Okay.
Yeah, and it just multiplied from there, and it was actually part of that crop we had to take out in March, April time, because there was no oats left. It was just infestated with brome. We had to take it out.
At that stage then, we had to make very different decisions.
Yeah.
And what did you do then?
Yeah, so we decided spring crop, and at the time we took decision, kind of press the restart button. We went for a plough, bury all the brome we had on top of the ground, and start again with our spring barley. So that's what we did in 21.
And flicked into spring barley because there'd be less brome growth in spring as well.
Yeah, and try and get our stale seedbed then as well over the winter period, over the autumn period. So.
And we can see then from harvest 21, really good result for the most part, very little. Although the really, really bad patch, there's probably still some kind of kicking around that.
There was, in that patch where we, it was coming through all the time through it, it was still there. So, for 2022 then, we made a decision, we wouldn't go back winter, we'd stay with the spring, get our stale seedbed again. But instead of ploughing again and bringing up all the seeds that we had buried the year previous, we decided to go in and not quite direct drill it, but we min-tilled it. So it's just a very shallow run of a disc down to maybe 2-3 inches, and then in with the direct drill.
Okay, in with direct drill. Spring barley down for harvest 22. We did a few counts even in the spring, but it was clear to see that in the spring of 22, of which oilseed rape went in 22 because we were trying to have a go at that brome again, there was still lots of brome in there, nonetheless. Yeah. So it's there bubbling in the surface, or underneath the surface, I suppose. The results in general in the field are brilliant. There's no brome in it at all. You must be very happy with that result.
Oh, excellent, yeah. Considering where we come from 2 years previous, it was excellent too.
Then you used good herbicide control?
Yeah, look, there's 3 herbicides gone on it. There's Catamaran Turbo, followed by our Stratus Ultra, and then followed by Astrocarb then as well. So we've got good control, I think, in the oilseed rape there at the moment.
Are you going back with winter barley again, or are you going to stick to something that you can control bromes in?
I'm still not happy that all the brome is fully gone from out of the system. So we will come back in with winter wheat, just so we have that broader range of herbicides to try and take out any potential brome that might come through in the crop.
Okay, brilliant. So it's a good result overall.
Excellent, yeah, absolutely.
What sort of lessons did you learn just by participating in the ECT program around this field area for the last few years?
Number one was awareness of weed pressure within the field and how, I suppose, different crops interact with that. The rotation has changed, so we brought in spring crops into the rotation in order to try and give us a chance to get our stale seabed and get a chance in order to try and control them grass weeds.
Have you taken many of those lessons out to your larger farm to everything else you're doing out there?
Absolutely, the whole farm has changed based on what we do here. I don't think there's a field that maybe anyone has at the moment that there isn't some bit of grassweed problem in. There's definitely grassweed issues on all of them that have to be looked at.
How are your yields stacking up now in comparison to, say, 5 years ago, when you weren't in the system?
We've seen the yields improve, but that is down to having a good rotation, good grassweed control, direct drilling coming in there as well, and we've seen now that yields have improved on the farm.
Has it the potential as your normal plough-based establishment system?
It definitely has the potential, but there definitely is more things that can firstly go wrong. The drilling of the crop is the most important when it comes to direct drilling. If you do things right and you make the alterations where you need it, I think absolutely you can reach your full potential.
Overall profitability from your farm, how has that progressed along over the last 5 years?
Everything you do has to be, I suppose, with profitability in mind in order to make money. But I suppose there is, of course, then the reduced costs, number one, in establishing your crop, and also the time. The time is a big factor as well. And especially, when weather windows, I suppose, are getting that bit tighter, being able to get through the work in a quicker space of time and getting your crops drilled in good conditions, it's definitely improving profitability on the farm and cutting by reducing them costs. So maybe looking at our cost input as well has to be considered as well in order to improve our bottom line. But it all links back to profitability at the end of the day, in relation to controlling the weed problem. I couldn't see us ever going back to ploughing, the time involved in ploughing, the cost of it, but also turning up our soil and exposing it and not having cover on the soil, is nearly alien to us the way it is now. I still think, though, maybe we have to be flexible that if you have to go and mint-till a field that maybe you didn't establish good cover crop, for whatever reason, it might be weather or whatever it might be, that maybe mint-till might have to happen. But as regards ploughing, no, definitely won't be going back to ploughing.
Yeah, as Owen said, it was challenging sort of at the beginning, and really you needed to keep the faith. But as it has gone on, it has proved to be very successful.
There is definitely a lot more interest in non-inversion tillage, and as a result, I suppose a lot of farmers in the region, in the locality, have started that journey as well now. We're definitely on the right track, I think.
So if a neighbour came to you, say, tomorrow or the next day, and was going to get into a similar system that you were going to get into, what 2 or 3 gems of wisdom would you give to that person that you would have loved to had when you were starting out?
Number one is rotation. Everything evolves around a good rotation. And I think number 2, and the biggest one, is to be that bit flexible. I'm not afraid maybe to go with a disc down to 3 inches maybe before my spring crop, just from a mineralisation point of view, and try and dry out that soil a bit for a spring crop. But if you're that bit flexible within the system and maybe change your crop and do a bit of cultivation if it needs to be done here and there, you definitely will, the system will work perfectly for you. Brome is the big problem here. Everyone has some bit of grassweed on their farm, but brome wasn't even thought about here. It was very much the crop, the no-till, the system, and weeds, our grassweeds are very much secondary. It's the awareness of the grassweeds on the farm. Know what you have and know how to control them. And if you know all them things, no matter if you're ploughing, direct drilling, mint-tilling, you will control them, but you have to know what you have and how to go about treatment.
A huge thanks to all the farmers for the benefit of their experience over the last 5 years. If you want to find out more about each of these farmers, visit our website, teagasc.ie, and search the ECT project.
Thanks very much to Owen and Brian there. I think everyone will agree that was a very good video, and all the videos from the farmers, thanks to the farmers for doing them, and they will be available online on the Teagasc website and social media, and there'll be QR codes as well on some of the Teagasc literature, so keep an eye out for them over the next while. Shay, I'll keep an eye on you on questions. You have a few there. So we have John Cousins now on lines and Dermot Forrestal. John, I'm going to go back to your presentation and start off with an easy one. You said in the middle of it that changes need to come to the seed supply chain and to regulations. So what would those changes be?
I think, I don't know how relevant this is to the situation in Ireland, but in the UK, the regulation's drafted very badly. It talks about productive crops. So if you're importing seed onto a farm, trading seed, and it's not for a productive crop, there's not a certification requirement, there's not a chain of custody requirement. So the level of just baked in biosecurity through regulation is poor. We also have an issue around the way that mixes fail to be inspected effectively. So that seems to be the key issue, not so much straight, pure seed supply, but the way that mixes are being outsourced, and we don't quite know where the person who's supplying them is sourcing them from, and there's no requirement. Yeah, okay. So we have a voluntary standard now with the seed trade, but it's not a requirement, so farmers can still import seed. So we don't even have a voluntary standard. Yeah, okay, very good. Shay, we'll take a question from you, will we? And I'll watch out for hands, so stick up your hands now.
Yeah, Siobhan, I have a couple of questions here. Actually, some of them came through from the last session. Probably most of them so far aimed at John. First one here, should land be left untilled after harvest for 3 weeks to let small seeds germinate? What's your opinion on that, John?
Yes. The problem is that there aren't 3 weeks between August and September that we haven't discovered yet. But from the weed management point of view, that is what we're finding, that not just, we've talked about it for bromes, but not just for bromes, for blackgrass and other weeds, actually leaving seeds on the soil surface is actually very useful. Where you're maybe going out of a winter crop to a spring crop, just having that period is very useful.
Yeah, another one here for you. Do good cover crops reduce grass weed pressure, in your opinion?
So obviously there's a lot of work in the UK on cover crops. It's been really quite an important part of the subsidy system. What we see is that the cover crops don't have a direct effect on the weeds. They support the crop, make the crop more vigorous, better establishment for the crop. So they are part of a grass weed management package, but we shouldn't obsess about what's in the cover crop in terms of having direct control effects on the weed. You think about the cover crop in terms of how it's supporting the crop.
Just two more for John there, just while you have the microphone, John. Something I've come across myself. People who are min-till seem to have more problems with willow herb. Is that something you're seeing across the water?
Yeah, so true. So one of the problems with talking about cultivation, conservation, is the terms, we don't pin down what the terms mean, but specifically for people who are using no disturbance, low disturbance drills, so John Deere, disc, singularly articulated disc type drills, we're beginning to see issues with a sort of species where glyphosate is the pinch point. So willow herb is actually quite difficult to kill with glyphosate, and there's no other cultivation in the system, so glyphosate's really important. I think it'd be interesting to swap notes with VJ. Part of the issue around Vulpia seems to be that actually the Vulpia has a higher requirement for glyphosate, harder to kill. Some of that problem is that in those true no disturbance systems, we're not killing it with glyphosate. So it speaks to how important glyphosate is in that system, that we're beginning to see weeds where that's the weak point.
Two more questions. One more for you, one for Owen at the moment. Last one for you, John, at the moment. We with the 3 metre buffers that we have to have around the water courses now, are these likely to harbour invasive species and other species that could encroach in our fields?
Dermot, you can take that either if you want.
Well, I suppose that depends to some extent on what you're putting in that buffer strip. So, I mean, if the grass mixtures for those buffer strips are not likely to have provided the seed is provided under a voluntary scheme, if you like, that ensures there's no other contaminants, it's not likely to cause a problem.
But I suppose those buffer strips have to go in, so there's probably loads of fields around Ireland where those invasive weeds are already a problem in those fields.
Yeah.
So is there advice for farmers on what to do in that situation?
In terms of controlling it in advance?
Yeah. But the buffers have to come in. They're in under the cap, so.
Yeah, but I'm not sure whether those areas would necessarily be such a source. I mean, I think the one that mainly in terms of hedgerows and that would be sterile brome in terms of invading from, or we often see invading from the hedgerows. So I think in that case, the species that you'll put in as a buffer strip will probably counteract that fairly well. In other words, bromes wouldn't proliferate, I think, in that sort of scenario. But now maybe...
But plant the buffer strip is the thing, planted rather than leave it. Yeah.
So I mean, the buffer strips are an opportunity to create a perennial vegetation to actually protect the arable crop from invasive species. But if that strip is not managed specifically to do that, if you just crop right up to the edge and just think, well, I'll get a bit less yield from the outside because I'm not treating it, you are creating the opposite. You're creating a pathway for weeds to invade.
Yeah,
I know that, again, it's like the 3 weeks we haven't discovered yet. If you've got really small field sizes, then that's pie in the sky, isn't it? But, yeah.
I'd say a lot of those buffer strips at the minute aren't planted, so it's good advice to people if they do plant them with grass seeds. Yeah. Jimmy?
A question for John there. I suppose blackgrass is probably seen as the most challenging grass we have here in Ireland, but I'd nearly argue that ryegrass is becoming an even more challenging weed, and I was just looking for your comment on that. And then also where you're seeing enhanced metabolism and we're seeing a lack of or reduced efficacy of the pre-emergers like flufenisate and Defy as well. Are you also seeing in the UK a reduction in the efficacy of glyphosate on those resistant populations?
So where Italian ryegrass is a problem on farm, it's a more significant problem and harder to manage. It's not as widely distributed yet as blackgrass, but the culture control measures aren't as effective, so spring cropping isn't as effective, ploughing isn't as effective, crop competition. So all of those things, whilst they are all in the same direction, they all seem to be a bit less effective. We seem to be seeing a more rapid evolution of insensitivity to a wider range of herbicides in ryegrass than we did in blackgrass. So to me, I would say where ryegrass becomes a problem, and the number of times a narrative is played out where you talk to a farmer and they've got significant ryegrass, and they say, it was in the gate, there was a few plants, there was a little patch, probably a baler, I don't know, and then 2 years later it's everywhere. And it's that little window that we want to focus on, I think. And in terms of glyphosate, we do think that Italian ryegrass, so they're Italians, they're multiflorums. We are beginning to see a reduction. So in field populations of Italian ryegrass, there's a 5-fold range in sensitivity to glyphosate that are collected as part of resistance testing. There are a couple of cases where we've identified glyphosate resistance occurring on farm, but so far they've all been managed and the population hasn't been allowed to set seed. And so we haven't got a field problem with glyphosate resistance yet. We definitely know that that's the risk.
A question down the back here on when you're getting there, I'll ask Owen. Owen, you took the decision to plough and to get the sterile brome under control. It sounded very easy in the video. I presume it wasn't an easy decision.
No, definitely wasn't an easy decision because we had made a plan, and as I kind of mentioned in the video, the plan was direct drilling with a winter crop scenario, and we didn't want to divert from that. And a grass weed, as I said, didn't really come into it. But I suppose, look, Seth and Jimmy had plenty of conversations at the time. I didn't want to do it. Jimmy was kind of telling me that we should do it. But I got to the stage that we had that crop of winter oats where we had to take some out. There's probably maybe an acre had to come out of the field in March time, had to be sprayed off. So you're at that situation, something has to be done. So look, we just made the decision. We just had to restart, to plough, bury the seed that was there and try start again. And look, if you have to do that, I think you have to do that.
Yeah. And have you any idea how much, by ploughing, how much did the brome reduce?
Look, you can see in the weed map that was there, you were going from that crop of winter oats that it was just everywhere in the field. And from 1 year of ploughing, I'd say at least 75% of it was eradicated. And by putting in the spring crop, of course, and getting our stale seed beds there as well. But I suppose if we had gone back and ploughed the following year again, we probably mightn't have got that amount of reduction. But definitely by having a problem and resetting it with the plough, it definitely helped.
Yeah. Dermot, you've plenty of experience out in Knockbeg with the system trials.
Plenty of weeds, Siobhan, yeah. Yeah, we have, and I think Owen's decision, we can certainly see differences between the systems there. Okay, you can see sterile brome, and sterile brome is our problem weed in Knockbeg. You can see sterile brome after ploughing in certain situations, but undoubtedly there's a difference between the systems. And, last year it was very evident. The winter barley, as many of you know, there's a rotation out there. We started oilseed rape, followed by wheat, followed by oats, followed by wheat again, followed by winter barley. And the winter barley is the real weak spot in that, where we get huge problems with brome in the non-inversion parts. We don't with the plough parts. So there is a difference there. Yeah. I'd say too with Owen, you say about was it a big decision? Well, I think for Owen, it probably wasn't as big in the sense that they weren't too long into direct drilling, if you know what I mean, that you wouldn't say that you were established. I mean, the aim of true direct drilling, which I think we have to question in our climate whether we'll ever get there, is that you leave the structure alone and you allow a kind of a vertical porosity to develop itself, right? If you are a long way down that track, then that decision might be a hard one. It's a little bit easier now. But I would question, are we ever going to get to that with our climate? Because we are going to have harvests, where maybe machinery traffic at harvest and that is going to be more compacting and that. So I would wonder, are we going to have to stay adopting quite flexible systems where we can change to suit at various times? And that is a little bit against the ideals of the true direct drill as applied maybe in other countries, but yet I think our systems have to be adapted to our climate. And we've already done that with the min-till that we practice, right? Because many farmers, many growers, they would be, I suppose, cultivating maybe a little bit more to a little bit more depth and intensity than they would in other climates, and probably lets them work in trickier autumns a little bit better than if you're a very shallow min-till, which we have maintained in Knockbeg, and we've got away perfectly from 2010 when we had a disaster with that system, if you like, very poor establishment, and we're going to have that again this year. Yeah. In between we were fine, but so I think we need to be very flexible and be prepared to adopt systems to suit the climate we have, to suit the yield potential that we have.
Yeah, a year like this, Dermot, there's big decisions to be made. You were writing about it in the Farmer's Journal a few weeks ago, the wet autumn. So, is your advice then to those direct drillers to move to a spring crop rather than take out the plough?
Yeah, I think if somebody is a long-term in direct drilling and is hoping for that build-up of vertical porosity in that, I think if you're a long time in that, I think the decision would be, yes, to defer and go for spring crop and try and stay in that system. But if you're not that long into the system, if you are being more flexible, well, then it's not as big a challenge. The people who are min-tilling, it's not a big deal if you decide to plough for a year. Yeah. Okay, I think a lot of them would have worked to maybe level their ground a certain amount, and going back in a plough might reset that a little bit. They're also used to the better carrying capacity. If you've tilled less intensively to a shallower depth, you will have better carrying capacity for machines on that. But it's not that you're losing something massive to go into plough for a season if you need to plough for a season from the way Irish growers are normally practicing min-till. The big advantages in some of those other systems are their work rates. Are their timeliness when they work really well. There's lots of advantages there, the cost of establishment and that. And like we've seen in Knockbeg that the min-till, and indeed our efforts in strip till and direct drill, most seasons we are standing up well on yield and that, but we are running into more problems with grass weeds, so the occasional reset, as Owen talked about, might be wise. So I wouldn't be against being flexible and being adapted to our climate.
Okay. Kieran, you have a question down there.
Hi, is this working? Yeah. Just a quick question for John. Thank you for great insight into potentially the future between invasive species and resistance. I'm already scared about using cover crops, but the future sounds even more scary. But we're constantly being chased by environmentalists and worried about, let's say, the thing of chemical buildup in the soil. Somewhere like the UK, where you've been using worse chemicals and more chemicals for things like blackgrass for longer, is that a serious concern? Are we, even to listen to all the options being talked about today, we are very dependent on our chemical usage, and is that a real concern about built-up in the soil and residue or not?
Well, maybe I'll out myself. I'm a great fan of regulation. And what's happened with the regulation of pesticides is some of those actives which had specific issues about being persistent and biologically, so PBTs, so building up too much. some of the herbicides which had specific issues about being too water soluble, leaking into watercourses. These have gone, and they are being replaced by active ingredients that have a much better regulatory footprint, you might say, but they are safer. So stuff like simmethlin and bixlozone, which is coming along, and these are better. I think the challenges are going to continue because what regulation does is it just moves the bar up every single time, and there are only so many ways you can kill a grass weed in a grass crop, it turns out. So we're going to see less of a pot of herbicides. What I would say is that right now, certainly in the UK, and you will be in Ireland, this is the absolute peak pre-emergence residual herbicide place. There are 6 major modes of action for pre-emergence control of grass weeds. There will be 2 new herbicides, simmethlin and bixlozone, in the next couple of years. But it's not sustainable to rely on them.
Shay, you have a question? And put up your hands if you have one.
Yeah, just 2 questions. They're kind of around the same area, Siobhan, and I'll put it to all 3 of the panellists, really. It's around the area of organic manures, and have organic manures a role either on Owen's farm or on reduced cultivation systems in general? Just an opinion from the three speakers, please.
Just rephrase that again, Shay.
The question, first one question here came in, does Owen use organic fertilisers? But there's another question here about the role of organic fertilisers on reduced cultivation systems. Do the guys think that they have a role, or can they be used in reduced cultivation systems?
Okay. Owen, are you using?
No, not at the moment, but would love to, and definitely would fit in with the system to try and, I suppose, build that organic matter similar to what we're trying to do with cover crops. But it's just trying to get it into the system is the problem. And really, you know, I think the further maybe we go down the road of direct drilling and, you know, the soil gets more used to it, maybe, you know, you'd be able to work it in that bit better. But at the moment, no, just trying to rely on straw chopping and cover crops as much as we can to build that organic matter, but down the road.
Are you concerned about importing a problem? Like if you were importing farmyard manure, you'd have to have some agreement that it would be your straw going to the farmer, or would that be a factor?
Look, it's definitely an issue that you have to be concerned about, but I don't think it's something that would stop you from doing it either. But look, as I said, when we were starting direct drilling, it's to try and get good at the system first, get that perfected, and then move on to maybe organic manures and add that into the system.
Fair enough, yeah. Jeremy, you're nodding your head there.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I think, you know, it is important to define the different types. I think you raised the issue with farmyard manure, but yet that's the one that probably is adding carbon.
Yeah.
I think we often overestimate what slurry is doing in terms of organic matter, you know, because most of the organic matter in organic manures will be in the farmyard manure, which is coming from the straw. But you're right, you want to be careful where you're getting that farmyard manure from. So, but there will be maybe opportunities in the future, you know, if animal farms are forced to destock, if slurry has to move off those, or it's not forced to destock, but forced to move nutrients as being an alternative to destocking, well, then there might be scope on more farms to take on those. But at the moment, you know, the cost of moving water, which is what you're doing with a lot of cattle slurry, because it hasn't a high nutrient load, is probably a little bit prohibitive. And I think people who want to be careful not to overvalue the benefits of organic manures in terms of bringing organic matter into the soil. Because as I say, they're mainly bringing nutrients if it's slurries. And yes, I suppose if it's farmyard manure and you can get your hands on that, that's bringing some more carbon into the equation, all right.
Is there any research on it at the minute in Oak Park, or will it be coming into that systems trials, so bringing in slurry or farmyard manure into those?
We have enough complications in that particular trial. But no, Richie Hackett has done quite a bit in the past. I don't know, is Richie here now, but Richie has certainly done a bit in the past in terms of organic manures. And again, there's been work done in Johnstown Castle in that. But you know, I think that there will be a change over the next number of years, as I say, if exporting nutrients from heavily stocked livestock farms becomes more of an option. Obviously, there'll be more interest then again, and from a research perspective, probably too.
Okay, we're getting short on time, so John, you have a question down there.
Yeah, it's for John Cousins, really, and going back to the missing 3 weeks that don't exist between August and September. We have a requirement here under nitrates to shallow cultivate 75-80% of your stubbles within 2 weeks of harvest. I think I'm getting the rules right. I'm close anyway. But after certain crops, or if you have certain grass weeds, rather than cultivate, you can roll.
Right.
So I'm just wondering what's your view on that in regards to the missing 3 weeks? You know, obviously you've got the option of not cultivating part of your land or rolling.
So what we found looking at post-harvest cultivation data sets from different sources is that actually, so you've got two sources of losses of freshly shed seed. You can either try and get the seeds to germinate and get lethal germination. You can spray it off before you put the next crop in. But also, the other source of losses is that you get these weed seeds, often like blackgrass, they're quite small seeds, they're on the surface. You're actually losing viability directly. You get direct seed mortality. You can't see the direct seed mortality in the way that you can see lethal germination. And what we've found is that it depends on the season. So if you have a dry post-harvest period, you should do nothing. Leave the seeds on the surface. Rolling, cultivation, increasing seed-to-soil contact, you shouldn't be doing. You should just rely on lethal germination. If there's good soil moisture there to get weed seeds to chit, very shallow cultivation, even rolling, to encourage lethal germination. So actually you've got different strategies that are optimum in different seasons.
Very good. Right, we're bang on time, and I don't think we've any more questions in. So thanks very much, Owen, to John and to Dermot for your time and for answering questions.